I invite you to tune into the story. I was in a coma for 3 days and my husband signed a do not resuscitate order. When I suddenly woke up and opened my eyes, I whispered a single sentence that made the doctor turn pale and immediately call the police. The pungent smell of antiseptics assaulted my nose. It was the signature scent of a hospital, a smell I had grown intimately familiar with over my 5-year medical career. But right now, it carried the metallic tang of blood and a cold, looming sense of death. I felt my body become as light as a dry leaf falling from a branch, swaying before dropping freely into an endless bottomless pit. Before the darkness could completely swallow my mind, I managed to hear the clattering of metal surgical instruments hitting a tray and the frantic screams of the triage nurse. It sounded so distant, echoing as if it were coming from another world. I wanted to open my eyes, wanted to tell them I could still hear them, but my eyelids were as heavy as lead, and my throat was so choked up I could not utter a single word. In that flickering delirium on the boundary between life and death, my hearing suddenly became incredibly sharp. It was as if sound was the only thread keeping me tethered to this world. I heard the frantic rush of footsteps and the rapid clatter of gurney wheels rolling across the freezing tile floor. And then came the panicked breaking voice of Julian. My close colleague and the absolute best attending surgeon in the neurosurgery department was shouting right next to my ear. Her BP is crashing fast. Pupils are blown. Prep or 1 right now. Call doctor. Vance's family, hurry up. I lay completely motionless on the narrow gurney, distinctly feeling the life draining out of my body bit by bit. My chest achy fiercely, my weak heart desperately trying to pump its final beats. About an hour passed, or perhaps it was an entire century for a weary soul waiting in limbo. Then I heard familiar footsteps, the sound of designer Italian leather shoes echoing against the marble floor, a steady, unhurried rhythm that made me shudder in horror. Sterling, my husband, had arrived. But contrary to what one might expect, a panicked voice, or the choked-back sobs of a man hearing his wife was in critical condition, what I heard was an eerily calm tone. He spoke with an airy indifference, sounding like he was inquiring about a real estate contract rather than the life of the woman he shared a bed with. How is she doing? Can you save her, or is she going to be a vegetable? Julian seemed momentarily stunned by that attitude. I heard Julian take a deep breath to suppress his anger, his voice trembling. Sterling Harper suffered a massive brain hemorrhage. We need to perform an immediate craniotomy to relieve the pressure inside her skull. The success rate is 70%. We can absolutely save her. Sign the surgical consent form. Hurry. We do not have any more time. The space suddenly plunged into a terrifying silence. I tried to gather the last ounce of my fading strength to listen, praying he would grab the pen and sign it immediately. But no, I just heard the slow, deliberate rustling of papers being flipped back and forth. The scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne drifted over, masking the smell of rubbing alcohol and blood. It was the cologne he always wore when meeting high-profile clients. Why did it feel so alien and cruel right now? Dr. Hayes, Sterling said, his voice slow and freezing cold. She once told me that a doctor's greatest fear is a fate worse than death. She doesn't want to live as a vegetable, becoming a burden to her husband and child. I am honoring my wife's wishes. His words felt like a razor-sharp blade plunging straight into my dying heart. I wanted to scream, wanted to jump up, grab him by his collar, and shout in his face that I never said that. I wanted to live. I wanted to watch my daughter grow up, but I couldn't do a single thing. I could only lie there as still as a log, enduring the most vicious betrayal from the person I had trusted with my entire life. What the hell are you talking about? Julian roared, his voice cracking with sheer outrage. There's a 70% chance of survival right in front of you. Are you even human? That's your wife? The mother of your child? Enough. Sterling cut Julian off, his tone hardening as sharp and cold as metal striking metal. I am her husband. I am her sole legal medical proxy right now. I am deciding against the surgery. Let her go peacefully. The scratching of a pen on paper echoed loudly, every stroke feeling like it was carving my very own tombstone. He signed it. He didn't sign to save me. He signed a death warrant, stripping away my final chance of survival. He crumpled the consent form and tossed it onto the desk with a heavy thud. His footsteps turned away, cold and decisive, leaving behind a wife waiting to die, and the stunned, horrified eyes of my colleagues. Thick darkness blanketed me, chilling me to the absolute bone. Inside the tight, pitch-black cocoon of my coma, my memories were the only things still alive. They rewound before my eyes like a slow-motion film painted in dreary, agonizing shades of gray. I remembered the fateful night before. The real reason I collapsed in the hospital lobby wasn't exhaustion from being overworked. As everyone mistakenly believed, the image of Sterling with a flushed alcohol-soaked face and bloodshot, aggressive eyes appeared vividly. That night, he threw a stack of property transfer documents onto the kitchen island, trying to force me to sign away the historic Oak Park estate my late parents had left me. It was my only family heirloom, a sacred sanctuary I swore to protect at all costs. When I firmly shook my head and refused, telling him that house was meant for our daughter's future, Sterling immediately dropped his glossy intellectual facade. He grabbed my hair, yanked my head backward, and slammed my skull violently against the edge of the solid mahogany dining table. The impact was so severe, I heard a sickening crack echo inside my skull. I saw stars, and a wave of nausea hit me instantly. You're a doctor. You know exactly where to hit someone so they die without leaving a mark, right? Sign this right now, he growled, his breath reeking of heavy bourbon right in my face. I gritted my teeth, endured the pain, stumbled to my feet, and managed to drag myself to work the next morning because I had a crucial scheduled surgery. I naively thought it was just a typical concussion, just like all the other times he had abused me. I never expected it to be a fatal blow. Outside the ICU doors, I faintly heard the whispering voices of Julian and Clara, the head nurse and my closest friend in the world. Clara's voice was trembling, choked with tears. Julian, look at Dr. Vance's old medical files. Oh my God. How could this happen? The rustling of paper echoed, followed by Julian's horrified gasp. Fractured 6th rib 5 months ago, hairline fracture on the left wrist 3 months ago. Occipital soft tissue contusions. She prescribed her own meds and treated all of this herself. The reasons listed are always falling off a bike or slipping down the stairs. I lay there listening to their words as tears bled backward into my heart filled with agonizing bitter humiliation. For the past 5 years, behind the perfect family photos and the luxury vacations Sterling loved to flaunt on social media lay a living hell I forced myself to endure. I was a chief of surgery, a lifesaver, deeply respected by countless patients. Yet when I went home, I was the silent victim of domestic violence. I was terrified of the rumors, terrified of the pitying looks from society. And most foolishly of all, I genuinely believed my endurance would keep a whole unbroken home for my daughter. She hid everything from us. Clara sobbed, her crying tearing at my soul. Just the other day, I saw her limping, and when I asked, she said it was a bad muscle cramp. Turns out that bastard beat her. He beats his wife brutally, yet out in public, he always plays the Julian's phone rang. Shadow. Julian put it on speakerphone, likely having called Sterling to try to convince him one last time. But answering his desperate plea was the loud, rowdy noise of clinking glasses and a cheering crowd at a sports bar. Hello, Dr. Hayes. I already told you I'm busy entertaining clients. Stop calling me. Sterling's slurred, booming voice echoed, mixed with the obnoxious laughter of his drinking buddies. Life and death are up to fate. If she goes, it's just her time. What do you expect me to do about it? Anyway, I got to go. We're in the middle of a game. The long endless beep of the disconnected line echoed, coldly severing all hope. He was celebrating. He was raising a glass to toast the agonizing, impending death of his own wife. His cruelty was no longer just the negligence of a controlling man. It was the cold-blooded nature of a vicious beast wearing human skin. I felt my chest about to explode from pure resentment. No, I couldn't die like this. I couldn't let that monster happily raise a glass over my grave. A fiery flame of vengeance ignited within the dying embers of my life. It pushed me, demanding I wake up, demanding I open my eyes to reclaim justice for myself. Darkness enveloped me for 3 agonizing days. It was a time when my soul felt lost in a freezing void with no beginning and no end. In that coma, I heard the rhythmic hissing of the ventilator like the Grim Reaper's ticking clock, and the hurried footsteps of my colleagues working day and night to snatch me back from death. But clearer than anything else was Sterling's voice. The husband I once loved deeply echoed from the other side of the boundary of life. His voice carried no worry or pity, only freezing, bone-chilling calculations. On the 3rd day, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot down my spine. My heart cramped in agonizing spasms, feeling like it would burst through my rib cage. The vital signs on the monitor began to freefall. The code blue alarm blared, piercing the quiet space of the ICU. Julian and the trauma team rushed in like a hurricane, defying the refusal of resuscitation form Sterling had signed. They made an executive medical decision to push high-dose epinephrine and use the defibrillator to keep me tethered to the living, charged to 200. Clear. Julian shouted with absolute authority, followed by the sensation of my chest violently convulsing. I was in pain, in so much pain, I wanted to let go of everything and sink into an eternal sleep. But then, Sterling's voice echoed right outside the hospital room door, harsh and full of malice. "What the hell are you people doing? I told you to pull the plug. If she's a vegetable, who's going to pay to take care of her? Do you have any idea how much these 3 days in the ICU have cost me?" That sentence hit my flickering soul like a bucket of ice water fueling a raging inferno of hatred. He didn't want to save me. He was afraid of losing money, afraid of supporting a disabled wife. Or more accurately, he was terrified I would wake up and expose his crimes. That pure hatred became the most powerful resurrection drug. I gathered every ounce of my remaining life force, forcing my impossibly heavy eyelids to peel open. The glaring fluorescent lights flooded my vision, making me incredibly dizzy. Everything around me blurred in a hazy fog. But then Sterling's image slowly came into sharp focus. He was standing right there pointing his finger at the doctors. His face beat red with rage. The exact second he turned around and locked eyes with me, I saw sheer, unadulterated terror explode in his pupils. He flinched and stumbled backward, all the blood draining from his face, his mouth stammering soundlessly. I wanted to sit up. I wanted to lunge at him and rip off that hypocritical mask, but my body was completely paralyzed, my throat bone dry from the endotracheal tube. Julian saw my eyes open, and he was so overjoyed, he nearly burst into tears. "Harper, you're awake. Thank God you're awake." He frantically checked the monitors, then signaled the nurse to pull the breathing tube. A burning pain shot up into my brain as the plastic tubing was pulled out. I coughed violently, every hack feeling like it was tearing my lungs apart. Clara rushed to support me. Her hot tears fell heavily onto my hand. I took a deep breath, trying to scrape together my fading strength, finally letting out the most crucial thing, the thing I had burned into my memory. Even as I touched the gates of death, Julian leaned in close, the entire room holding its breath. I stared dead at Sterling. My gaze was no longer the resigned look of the weak wife from the past 5 years. It was the stare of a judge looking at a man on death row. I wheezed, pausing between every single word. Phone, locker, password, Eleanor's death anniversary. Those 6 words came out faintly, but carried the destructive force of a nuclear bomb. In the dead silent room, Sterling froze solid. His feet were glued to the floor, his eyes bulging as if he were staring at a ghost. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He tried to lunge forward, his hand reaching out as if to cover my mouth, but Julian was a step faster. He stepped directly in front of the hospital bed, his eyes locked fiercely onto Sterling, simultaneously signaling Clara to run. "Clara, go get hospital security and the Chicago police right now. Nobody is allowed to leave this room." Getting Julian's order, Clara grabbed my spare key ring and shot out of the ICU like an arrow. The sound of her sneakers pounding against the empty hospital corridor felt urgent and frantic, mirroring the extreme panic in her heart. Lying on that bed, even though I didn't see it with my own eyes, I could perfectly picture my best friend's every move. For years, Clara was the only one who vaguely sensed the red flags in my life. But I was the one who always found a way to cover them up, brushing off her concern with forced fake smiles. Clara sprinted straight to the surgical residence lounge, the place I always lied to my husband about having to pull overnight shifts to escape his unprovoked beatings. The door to my personal metal locker had a small photo taped to it. It was a picture of me smiling brightly on the day I graduated from med school. That smile now looked so incredibly bitter and distant. Clara's hands shook as she jammed the key into the lock. The metallic click echoed sharply in the quiet lounge. The locker door popped open, and what met Clara's eyes wasn't just a white lab coat or a few medical textbooks like the other doctors had. Hidden inside that cramped space was an entire secret life I had tried so hard to conceal. Neatly folded clothes stacked on top of each other, a worn-out toothbrush, a half-used tube of toothpaste, a frayed washcloth, and a thin sleeping bag rolled up tightly in the corner. Clara later told me that in that exact moment she broke down sobbing. She realized that the powerful, elegant chief of surgery everyone admired was actually a homeless woman seeking refuge in her own workplace. I had treated the hospital as my true home, my only safe haven from a violent husband. Those old belongings were proof of the long nights I huddled in the lounge, too terrified to go back to our condo because I feared Sterling's drunken rages, his stinging slaps, and the heavy punches to my ribs. Clara reached deep into the darkest corner of the locker. I had carefully camouflaged it with a thick stack of medical journals. Her fingers brushed against something hard and freezing cold. It was my old outdated smartphone, its screen webbed with spiderweb cracks, lying silently like a mute witness, waiting for the day it could finally speak. I had hidden it there for an entire year, living in constant terror every single day that he would find it. But it was the absolute last life preserver I could cling to. Clara grabbed the phone, feeling like she was holding her best friend's life in the palm of her hands. She didn't dare hesitate for a second longer. She slammed the locker shut, clutched the phone tightly to her chest, and sprinted back to the ICU. Outside, a sudden Chicago autumn downpour lashed against the glass windows, sounding like nature itself was weeping for my bitter fate. Inside the hospital room, the tension was suffocating. Sterling was still standing there, cornered by two young male doctors and hospital security guards. He paced around like a trapped wild animal, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape, sweating profusely despite the AC being set to the lowest temperature. When the doors burst open and Clara walked in holding the phone, I saw the color completely drain from Sterling's face. Clara walked right up to my bed, her hands still shaking as she presented the phone to Julian and the two CPD patrol officers who had just arrived. The old phone, its outer paint chipping away, looked incredibly small among the high-tech medical equipment, but it radiated the weight of a 000 pounds. Sterling, cornered in the room, saw the phone and snapped like a rabid dog. He screamed, "That is my wife's private property. You have no right to violate her privacy. Give it back to me." A young CPD officer with a stern face stepped right in front of Sterling, his voice ringing out like iron. "I suggest you step back and keep quiet, sir. This is critical evidence based on the victim's statement. If you make one more move, we'll put you in cuffs right now for disorderly conduct and obstructing an investigation." Sterling froze. He ground his teeth audibly, his bloodshot eyes glaring murderously at the phone, looking as if he wanted to incinerate it with his gaze alone. Julian picked up the phone. The screen lit up, asking for a passcode. He turned to look at me, his eyes full of questions and anticipation. I lay there, my breathing still shallow, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. "Eleanor's death anniversary." I rasped, repeating the words as if draining the last drop of my strength. Julian frowned. He turned to Sterling. "When is your mother's death anniversary?" Sterling clamped his mouth shut. He looked away, deliberately dodging the question. He actually thought that if he just kept his mouth shut, no one would be able to unlock the device. He was dead wrong. Clara stood nearby, pulling out her own phone and quickly scrolling through her social media. October 23rd, Clara announced loudly, her voice thick with resentment. "Every year on this date, Harper takes PTO, buys all these memorial flowers, and cooks a massive dinner. But the next day, she comes to work with bruised eyes. I remember it perfectly because last year she had to be put on an IV drip the day after." Julian nodded. His fingers rapidly punched the numbers 1023 into the screen. The phone buzzed slightly and unlocked. The home screen popped up pure black. No wallpaper. No entertainment apps. There was just one single folder sitting alone in the middle of the screen with a short haunting name. Evidence. Why was the passcode my mother-in-law's death anniversary? Perhaps no one could understand the sheer agony behind those numbers except me. That was the day Eleanor passed away from a chronic illness 6 years ago, and it marked the beginning of my life's tragedy. Every single year, without fail, on the anniversary of her death, Sterling would get blackout drunk and drag me out to beat me mercilessly in front of her memorial portrait. He hit me and cursed at me, blaming me for being the bad omen that drained his family's luck, claiming I was the reason his mother died early. He forced me to kneel all night, denying me food and water, just so I had to listen to his irrational, abusive rants. 1 year. He even dumped a bowl of scalding hot pot roast directly onto my head just because I didn't salt it enough. The anniversary of my mother-in-law's death, a day that should have been spent respectfully honoring the deceased, became the day my own dignity was slaughtered. I made that date my password so that every time I opened the phone, the pain would remind me never to forget, never to go soft, and never to forgive that absolute monster. Julian tapped the evidence folder. Inside, it was organized with a precision that was heartbreaking. Audio, injury, photos, prescriptions, videos. Every subfolder contained dozens of files, sequentially numbered and clearly dated. Looking at that meticulous organization, Julian couldn't hold back his tears. He finally understood that to gather this evidence, I had to trade my own blood, tears, and absolute terror during 5 agonizing years living in hell. One of the officers pulled a connection cable from his bag and plugged my phone into a small Bluetooth speaker they carried for taking field statements. The entire room fell dead silent. The tension was stretched so tight it could snap. Sterling huddled against the wall. His head bowed, his hands gripped together so hard his knuckles were chalk white. He knew his judgment day had arrived. Julian randomly selected a file from the audio folder. A crackle of static played first, followed by a sudden, deafening sound that ripped through the room. Smack! It was a slap so violent and crisp that just hearing it made your face sting. Then came Sterling's slurred, bourbon-drenched voice, dripping with contempt. You think you're some big shot doctor, huh? Look at yourself. You're nothing but skin and bones, always looking so pathetic. Me marrying you was an act of charity for your whole damn family. You hear me? Then came my own voice, begging, trembling, and frail. Please, Sterling, you're drunk. Go to bed. Please don't hit me anymore. I have a major surgery tomorrow. Screw your surgery. Sterling roared on the recording, accompanied by the loud crash of shattering objects. You make a pathetic salary, and you're gone all day and night. I forbid it. Starting tomorrow, I forbid you from going to work. You stay home and serve me. If you step 1 foot out that door, I will break your legs. Everyone in the room shuddered. The young CPD officer clenched his fists, glaring at Sterling with pure disgust. None of them could have imagined that beneath the polished, respectable exterior of a successful real estate developer lay a soul this twisted and sick. Sterling remained silent, but his shoulders began to violently shake. He was sweating bullets, soaking completely through his expensive dress shirt. Julian switched to another recording dated 3 months ago. This time there was no sound of physical beating, but the content was infinitely more terrifying. Sign it. I told you to sign the loan papers right now. Sterling hissed through his teeth. I need 500 grand to flip this project. If you don't sign it, I'll throw you out on the street. Don't think you can hide those bank accounts your parents left you. I know about all of them. That's Piper's college fund from my parents. I can't. My recorded voice was sobbing. Your money is my money. You are my wife. I have the right to do whatever I want with your assets. If you don't hand it over, don't blame me for being vicious. A heavy thud echoed, followed by my piercing scream, which was instantly silenced. The recording ended with Sterling's heavy panting and him muttering curses. Stupid. Beating you is the only way you learn. Hearing this, Clara couldn't take it anymore. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Julian's eyes were bloodshot. He looked at me with deep sorrow. For years I had always acted strong and cheerful around my colleagues. Who would have guessed that the moment my front door closed, I was facing a demon wearing a husband's skin? Those vile words and brutal beatings had eroded my body and soul. Day by day, hour by hour, the lead detective signaled to turn off the speaker. He walked right up to Sterling, his voice deep, firm, and entirely devoid of mercy. Sterling Vance, based on this preliminary evidence, we have sufficient grounds to arrest you for aggravated domestic battery. You're coming with us to the precinct. The freezing cold steel of handcuffs clamped down on Sterling's wrists. The metallic clicks echoed sharply, cold and absolute. Sterling didn't struggle or argue anymore. He looked like a deflated balloon, utterly pathetic and broken. As he was being escorted past my hospital bed, he lifted his head, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. There was no aggression left in those eyes, only terror and a hint of sheer disbelief. Perhaps even at this very moment, he couldn't process that the submissive wife he had despised for so long was the one sending him to prison, using the exact evidence he thought would remain buried in the dark forever. Julian hesitated for a second before deciding to open the injury photos folder. His finger swiped across the touchscreen, seemingly heavy as lead, as if he were turning the pages of a diary soaked in blood and tears. The first photo popped up, enlarged on the screen. What struck everyone was a massive pitch-black hematoma taking up my entire thigh, standing out starkly against pale skin. In the corner of the photo, I had carefully used an app to overlay the date and reason. May 17th, 10 minutes late due to Chicago traffic. Just for being 10 minutes late, just because I couldn't get home in time to heat up his dinner before he arrived. I had to endure brutal kicks to my thigh from his steel-toed Oxford shoes. He kicked me while screaming that I was a worthless woman who neglected her family. Meanwhile, I had just finished a 4-hour emergency appendectomy. I remembered limping for an entire week after that, lying to my coworkers that I accidentally bumped into an operating table. The second photo appeared. This time it was a close-up of my heavily swollen face featuring a deep gash on the outer edge of my left eye that was still oozing fresh blood. The caption read, "October pot roast was too salty." I lay on the hospital bed, squeezing my eyes shut, but the burning pain of the slap from that day still felt entirely fresh on my skin. He had thrown the scalding hot soup right at me. The heavily salted broth seeped into my open wound, stinging all the way to my brain. He didn't just hit me. He forced me to get on my hands and knees and lick the spilled broth off the hardwood floor like a dog, demanding I apologize between licks for not knowing how to please my husband. And just like that, photo after photo scrolled before the eyes of everyone in the room. Every single picture was a scar, an agony I had bitten my tongue to endure in silence. There were photos of my bare back, crisscrossed with angry red, bleeding welts, layered over one another like a sinister web. Photos of my hand slammed in a door, swollen and bruised purple. Sterling stood there, his face shifting from bright red to pale, and then to a sickly white. He stammered, his voice trembling as he tried to salvage his very last shred of dignity. Those are because she bruises easily. We occasionally have minor physical altercations or things get out of hand when we're joking around. I never meant any real harm. Joking around, Clara screamed. She couldn't hold back, lunging forward and shoving the phone right in Sterling's face. "Open your damn eyes and look. Who jokes around and beats their wife until her bones fracture and her skull cracks? Look at it. Are you a human being or a monster?" Sterling backed away. He turned his face, unable to look directly at the damning evidence. He knew every excuse right now was entirely pointless and absurd. The wounds on my body couldn't lie. They were the most vibrant living witnesses screaming out his crimes. I looked at him, an infinite wave of bitterness rising in my chest. This man, the man I once thought was my safe harbor, turned out to be the one who personally shoved me into an abyss of pain and despair. In the room smelling heavily of antiseptics, the detective let out a heavy sigh of disgust. He looked at Sterling with absolute contempt. The kind of look reserved for a coward who only knows how to use his fists to dominate a weaker woman. I knew these photos weren't just evidence to convict him in court. They were a moral life sentence that would haunt him until the day he died. Julian took a deep breath, his fingers stopping on an audio file inside the folder. This file was starred as important, and clearly time-stamped, 11:38 p.m. October 17th. That was the fateful night. The night before, I was brought to the hospital in a deep coma. If the photos were an indictment of physical abuse, this recording was the absolute ironclad proof of his premeditated intent to murder me and his bottomless greed. The air in the room felt thick as concrete. Everyone held their breath. Julian pressed play. The initial static was quickly replaced by Sterling's loud raging shouts. His voice was slurred, but intensely threatening. "Sign it. I told you to sign the deed to the Oak Park house right now. I already took the buyer's earnest money. Don't test me." Next came my firm but terrified voice. "You're insane. That's my family estate. It's the only sanctuary Piper has. You blew your money gambling. You figure it out yourself. Don't you dare touch that house. I will never sign it. You think you can lecture me? That house is a marital asset. I am your husband. I have the right to sell it." Sterling roared on the recording, accompanied by loud crashes, shattering glass, and my own blood-curdling scream. "Ah, stop. Don't hit me. It hurts. Sterling, I'm begging you." On the tape, the sickening sounds of heavy punches and kicks landed clearly, sounding like sledgehammers hitting a sandbag. But infinitely more horrifying were the words that spilled out of Sterling's mouth right after. So cold and cruel, they made the listener's skin crawl. "You won't sign it? Fine. If you die, the house goes to me anyway. I'm your sole beneficiary. I have custody of our kid. I can sell it whenever I want. You're going to kill me?" My voice was faint, gasping through the pain. "Killing you gets my hands dirty." Sterling chuckled, a manic deranged laugh echoing on the recording. "I just need to beat you half to death and then refuse your medical care. You die from a fall, from an injury. How does that trace back to me? I don't have to waste money feeding you. And I get the full $2 million life insurance payout, plus the house. You dying is the absolute best thing for this family." Following that sentence was the sound of my head being violently slammed against something hard, a sickening, dry crack, and then total silence. Only Sterling's heavy breathing and his footsteps walking away remained. He left me lying unconscious on the freezing hardwood floor. The recording ended, leaving behind a silence so deep it was terrifying. Sterling leaned back against the wall, his limbs shaking violently, every drop of color drained from his face. He knew that specific sentence was the final nail in the coffin, burying his life. He hadn't just committed domestic battery. This was clear-cut, premeditated attempted murder with a despicable motive, stealing my assets and life insurance. Julian's eyes as he looked at Sterling were no longer just filled with rage. They held absolute pure disgust. He couldn't believe the man standing before him was so cold-blooded. He would calculate his own wife's death for a payout. The lead detective slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked at Sterling, his deep voice ringing out like the bell of judgment. "Sterling Vance, this recording says it all. You didn't just beat your wife. You fully intended to take her life to steal her property and her life insurance. This is an unforgivable crime." I lay on the bed, hot tears streaming down my face. Finally, the naked truth about the man I slept next to had been dragged into the light. Physical pain can heal over time, but the scars in my soul from human betrayal and malice are something I will probably never forget as long as I live. The detective signaled his two subordinates, his face hardened, strict, and authoritative. He loudly declared the emergency arrest of Sterling Vance. "You are under arrest for aggravated domestic battery and attempted first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Hearing the words arrest and murder, Sterling seemed to snap out of a trance. The survival instinct of a coward kicked into overdrive. He thrashed and screamed like a maniac, trying to break free from the iron grip of the two young officers. "Let me go. You have no right to arrest me. This is a private family matter. I am her husband. I have the right to discipline my wife. If she isn't pressing charges, what right do you have to arrest me?" He spun toward me, his bloodshot eyes full of a chaotic mix of threats and begging. "Harper, say something. Tell them to let me go. I'm your husband. I'm Piper's father. Are you really going to let our kid be known as the girl with a father in prison? You're awake now, so let it go." Husbands and wives argue behind closed doors. Why drag the police into this? I closed my eyes, a single tear rolling down my gaunt cheek. He was still the exact same, right to the bitter end, using our child as a human shield, using the title of family to manipulate me. But this time was different. My heart had died the exact second he put pen to paper and signed that "do not resuscitate" form. I said nothing, merely turning my face toward the wall. My silence was the most decisive answer, an absolute rejection of this cursed relationship. Click! The freezing sound of metal snapping shut echoed, cutting off Sterling's pointless screaming. The shiny steel handcuffs locked tight around his wrists, marking the end of the era where he reigned terror over my small home. He was dragged out the door, his shoes dragging against the linoleum, making a sharp grating noise. As he passed my bed, he snapped his head back. The look he gave me held absolutely no trace of affection, only pure toxic hatred. "You remember this? If I get out of here, you are dead. You evil. How dare you send your own husband to jail?" His curses faded and completely died out once the heavy ICU doors swung shut, returning the room to its usual quiet. But that quiet carried a strangely tragic tone. I opened my eyes, staring blankly at the sterile white ceiling. I didn't feel the triumph or joy I had imagined. Inside me, there was only a vast, infinite emptiness. Deliverance came hand in hand with heartbreaking agony. Julian stepped closer, gently pulling the thin hospital blanket up over me. His eyes looked at me with deep sympathy and shared pain. I lay there, feeling like my energy had been completely drained away with Sterling's departing footsteps. The pain from my unoperated wounds and my old injuries began to roar back to life, tormenting my already broken body. Julian and Clara stayed right by my side. They didn't dare step a foot away. Clara slumped into a chair, her eyes red, her hand still clutching my old phone like it was a sacred relic. She carefully plugged a cable in, connected it to a laptop, copied all the data onto a USB drive, and uploaded it to a secure cloud server. "Harper, just rest. Julian and I will handle everything else," Clara said softly, her voice still shaking with emotion. I gave a slight nod, my eyelids incredibly heavy. I wanted to sleep, a deep, dreamless sleep to escape this brutal reality. But my hypersensitive hearing still picked up the chaotic murmurs echoing from the hallway. Even though the ICU doors were tightly shut, they couldn't block out the gossip of nosy onlookers. I heard her husband got arrested by the CPD right on the spot, dragged out in handcuffs. Yikes. He looks so polished. Who knew he beat his wife? You really can't judge a book by its cover. But I heard the wife is ruthless too, secretly gathering evidence for years just to throw him in prison. Women these days are terrifying. Those words felt like needles jabbing into my ears. People are like that. They love to spin tales and cast judgment on other people's trauma without knowing any of the facts. I knew a media storm was coming. A prestigious female chief of surgery abused by her husband nearly died because he refused her care and then personally sent him to jail. It would be prime gossip for water cooler chatter, fueling staring eyes and cheap pity. I gripped Julian's lab coat tightly. My hand was shaking violently. I wasn't afraid of physical pain, but I was terrified of the court of public opinion. I was terrified my daughter would grow up surrounded by those rumors. Julian seemed to understand my panic. He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, his eyes resolute. Don't listen to them. You did the right thing. You were incredibly brave, and we will always stand by you. Julian's words acted like a sedative, helping my erratic heartbeat slowly stabilize. He was right. I did nothing wrong. I was just protecting my own life, protecting my daughter's future. I closed my eyes, letting the soothing darkness take over, reminding myself that I had to be strong. After a fitful sleep filled with nightmares, I woke up when the weak morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a pale beam across the stark white bedsheets. The very first sensation wasn't physical pain from my crisscross scars, but a strange profound relief in my soul. It felt as if a 1,000-pound boulder that had crushed my chest for 5 years had finally been lifted. Julian and Clara were still on standby. Their faces were exhausted from a lack of sleep, but their eyes lit up with joy when they saw me stir. Clara quickly helped me sit up, tucked an extra soft pillow behind my back, and handed me a cup of warm water. The soothing water washed down my dry throat, waking up the dormant cells in my body, reminding me that I was still alive, and the war for justice had only just begun. The hospital room door clicked open. The lead detective and a female investigator walked in. They weren't in uniform, wearing plain clothes instead, and their demeanor was incredibly considerate and restrained. They likely didn't want to put more psychological pressure on someone who had just returned from the brink of death. The detective pulled up a chair next to my bed. He took out his notepad and a voice recorder. His voice was warm but highly professional. Dr. Vance, we know you're still recovering, but your statement right now is absolutely critical to finalizing the case file. Please stay calm and tell us exactly what happened. Do not leave out any details, no matter how small. I nodded, taking a deep breath to suppress the rising wave of emotion. I began to speak. My voice was weak and raspy, but every word was crystal clear. I talked about our early days of marriage, about the flawless facade of a highly educated, loving family man that Sterling had meticulously crafted to blind the world. I talked about the very first slap just 3 months after the wedding when I accidentally broke his favorite vase. That slap was like a bucket of ice water to the face, shattering my dream of a perfect marriage. But to save face and afraid of worrying my parents, I chose to stay silent and forgive him. He didn't just beat me, I said, tears beginning to roll down my hollow cheeks. He isolated me from the outside world. He controlled all our finances. He kept my paycheck cards, giving me a meager allowance of a few hundred a week for groceries. He forbade me from hanging out with friends, and even installed GPS tracking on my phone to monitor my every move. Every time I came home a few minutes late or a male colleague called to discuss a case, it was guaranteed I would suffer a brutal beating that night. The female investigator jotted notes furiously, her brow furrowed in deep sympathy. I kept talking about the emotional abuse, about the vulgar insults degrading my character and my family that Sterling spat out every time he drank. He turned me from a confident, optimistic surgeon into a submissive woman, constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. I talked about the times I wanted a divorce, but he threatened to kill my family, leak intimate photos, and hurt our daughter. That fear was like an invisible noose tightening around my neck, paralyzing me from fighting back or crying for help. That night, my voice shook as I recalled the most horrifying moment. He forced me to sign the deed to sell the house to pay his debts. When I refused, he grabbed my hair and smashed my head into the table. Before I passed out, he said I should just die and rid him of his debt so he could claim the life insurance. The detective stopped writing. He looked up at me, his eyes full of empathy and fierce determination. He said, Dr. Vance, what you endured is horrific, but rest assured, with this statement and the evidence you've gathered, we will make sure he pays the maximum penalty under the law. Your silence is over. I signed my name on the statement report. The signature was messy, but decisive. Putting my pen to that paper felt like personally signing the Emancipation Proclamation for my own life. I was no longer a silent victim. I was the accuser, the strongest living witness to the crimes of the man I once shared a bed with. After the police left, the mood in the room settled slightly, but the tension still lingered in the air. Clara was still holding my phone. She seemed to be looking for something else in the chaotic mess of data I had saved. Suddenly, Clara gasped softly. "Harper, in the hidden cloud folder, there's one more video file created on the afternoon of October 17th, just a few hours before you were attacked." I flinched, memories of that gloomy afternoon rushing back. That day, after eavesdropping on Sterling's phone call with aggressive debt collectors who threatened to handle me if I didn't sell the house, I sensed imminent danger. An ominous premonition warned me that I might not get another chance to tell the truth. So, taking advantage of a quiet moment in the residence lounge, I locked the door, propped my phone on a bookshelf, and recorded a living will video. "Open it, Clara." I nodded at her. "That's my dying declaration recorded just in case I never woke up again." Clara's hand shook as she pressed play. On the phone screen, the image of me from that day appeared. My face was pale and hollow. My eyes deeply sunken with dark circles from insomnia, but my gaze radiated an eerie, unyielding strength. In the video, I was wearing my white lab coat, sitting rigidly in front of the lens. My voice was slow and precise like I was reading an indictment. "My name is Dr. Harper Vance, attending neurosurgeon. Medical ID number attached. If you are watching this video, it means something terrible has happened to me. I am dead or I am in a coma. I want to state for the record that I am not depressed. I have no suicidal ideation and my physical health is perfectly normal. If I die under suspicious circumstances, the only suspect is my husband, Sterling Vance." In the video, I paused for a second to swallow my tears, then briefly summarized the abuse, Sterling's massive debt, and his plot to steal my assets. I clearly stated the phone passcode, the locations of other hidden evidence, and delivered the video's closing statement. I stared dead into the lens as if piercing through the souls of those left behind. "Please help me get justice. Do not let my death be in vain. And if at all possible, please protect my daughter. Don't let her live with a father who is a literal monster. Silence is not golden. Silence is complicity with evil. I was wrong to stay silent for so long, but I hope this delayed outcry will salvage some of my dignity." The video ended, leaving a chilling void. Clara covered her face, sobbing hysterically, her shoulders violently shaking. Julian turned away, secretly wiping a tear rolling down his cheek. He couldn't believe that the tough senior colleague he knew had to prepare for her own death in such agonizing, lonely desperation. That video wasn't just evidence. It was the heart-wrenching SOS of a woman pushed to the absolute edge. It was a tear-soaked will written in pure desperation. I looked at myself in the now darkened phone screen, my stomach tying itself in knots. When I recorded that video, I had fully accepted death. I was mentally prepared to leave this world. But now, having crossed the gates of death and returned, I valued my life more than ever. That video would be the final nail sealing Sterling's coffin of lost freedom, shattering any defense of an accident or marital scuffle that he and his lawyers might try to concoct. The peace in the hospital room didn't last long before loud, chaotic shouting erupted from the hallway. Footsteps pounded against the floor, accompanied by shoving and the shrill venomous voice of an older woman echoing clearly through the soundproof glass. I shuddered, immediately recognizing Eleanor's voice. My mother-in-law. She had arrived not to visit the daughter-in-law who just escaped death, but to cause a scene and defend her precious son who was just hauled off to jail. "Let me go. Get out of my way. Let me inside to interrogate that home wrecker. Has she lost her damn mind, calling the cops to arrest her own husband? You classless, you adulteress." The hospital room door rattled violently under the brutal pounding from the outside. Julianne quickly signaled the guards to block the door, but Eleanor's voice squeezed through the cracks as sharp as a knife cutting into my ears. She wailed tragically, staging a theatrical performance of extreme victimhood right in the middle of a sacred hospital. "Lord have mercy, my son is a saint. He loves his wife and kid with all his heart, and that set him up. Harper, get out here and talk to me. You cheated. You gave all your money to your lover. And then you framed my son for beating you. Do you have any conscience left? Our family is cursed to have a daughter-in-law like you. I lay on the bed, listening to every word of my mother-in-law's blatant lies and curses, feeling entirely disgusted. For the past 5 years, she fully knew her son beat me. Yet, she never once intervened. On the contrary, whenever she saw my face covered in bruises, she would sneer sarcastically. She probably mouthed off, so her husband had to teach her a lesson. Women who don't know their place deserve a beating. Her blind coddling and protection were the toxic fertilizer that grew Sterling's violent habits. Now, when her son was arrested, she flipped the script to play the victim, using her loud mouth to twist the truth, turning me from a victim into a villain. She screamed to everyone that I was crazy, paranoid, and had injured myself to frame my husband. Those vicious words made Clara shake with rage. She was about to throw the door open for a face-to-face showdown, but I shook my head to stop her. I knew their family's nature perfectly well. The more you argued, the more they escalated, putting on an even bigger show to attract public attention. The noise outside grew louder. It sounded like Eleanor had thrown herself onto the floor, throwing a tantrum to draw the curiosity of patients and families in the neighboring rooms. Everyone, come look. My daughter-in-law is highly educated, but she has no morals. She wants to steal his assets, so she threw her husband in prison. My son is innocent. I closed my eyes, a bitter smile spreading across my lips. The apple truly doesn't fall far from the tree. Sterling's shamelessness and cruelty were fully inherited from this mother. But she was dead wrong. This was a hospital. This was a place governed by the law, not a flea market or her own house where she could do whatever she wanted. A moment later, the heavy boots of hospital security and CPD officers arrived on the scene, barking orders to disperse. Eleanor's screams of resistance faded as she was forcibly escorted out of the ward. The space returned to silence, but the humiliation lingered. I felt like I had just been stripped naked and dragged through the mud in front of a crowd. But simultaneously, I felt a strange relief. My mother-in-law's clumsy, crude, theatrical performance helped sever whatever tiny bit of loyalty or guilt I had left. From this moment on, her family and I were officially on two opposite battle lines. We were no longer family. We were mortal enemies. That afternoon, the lead detective returned to the hospital room. His face was much more somber than in the morning. He brought a thick case file, placed it gently on the table, and looked at me with deep severity. He said the expanded investigation had revealed horrifying secrets about Sterling's motive, truths that even I, the wife who lived with him for 5 years, had only vaguely suspected a tiny fraction of. Dr. Vance, we verified Sterling's financial status. The situation is much more severe than you thought. He didn't just owe a few hundred, 000. The real number is over $500,000. I was stunned. My heart skipped a beat. $500,000. A massive sum that a salaried doctor like me couldn't even dream of paying off. I knew Sterling liked to party, bet on sports, and play the lottery. But I assumed he just owed petty cash a few thousand, maybe 10 grand at most. It turned out he was a degenerate gambler, completely drowning in the swamp of illegal loan sharks and offshore sports betting. He had secretly leveraged the Gold Coast condo we were living in, taking out a massive bank loan under the guise of real estate capital, only to blow it all on online gambling rings. Now the bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings, the detective continued, his steady voice feeling like a hammer hitting my head. That's not all. He took out hot loans from the mob for another 200 grand with exorbitant interest rates. The loan sharks gave him an ultimatum. If he didn't pay up this week, they were going to handle him by street rules. I was paralyzed, realizing the reason he forced me to sign away my parents' historic Oak Park estate that night wasn't just simple greed. It was the desperation of a man pushed to the absolute edge. He needed cash, lots of cash, to plug the massive hole he had dug himself. And when I firmly refusing to sell the last sacred heirloom of my parents, he hatched the most malicious idea of all, killing me. We also found a life insurance policy in your name. The sole beneficiary is Sterling Vance with a payout for accidental death amounting to $2 million. The detective flipped open a page in the file, pointing at a photocopied contract bearing my forged signature. He calculated everything perfectly. If you died that night from accidentally falling down the stairs, he would have sold your parents' house as your legal heir, collected the life insurance, and shed the burden of a wife. The total amount he stood to steal was nearly $3 million, more than enough to clear his debts and live in luxury. I shuddered, a freezing chill running straight down my spine. So my life, our 5 years of marriage, our little daughter, everything in his eyes was just numbers on a spreadsheet. He didn't view me as a human being. He viewed me as merchandise, a goldmine for him to exploit one last time before tossing away. His cruelty didn't stem from a moment of blind rage. It was a cold-blooded plan programmed by greed and a total decay of human morality. I recalled his icy glare when he signed the "Do Not Resuscitate" form. I remembered his exact words. Let her go peacefully. Peacefully. He just wanted me to die fast so he could expedite the life insurance payout. He wanted to use my blood and my life to wash away his filthy gambling debts. I felt sick, nauseous just thinking about the fact that I had shared a bed with a demon wearing human skin. News of the domestic abuse and Sterling's murder plot spread at breakneck speed, faster than any virus I knew in the medical field. In just one night, my family's story became the epicenter of attention across social media. Clara brought her phone in for me to see. Her fingers scrolled continuously down the screen, going through endless posts and polarized comments in the local Facebook community groups and neighborhood apps, where Sterling used to frequently post perfect family pictures and lavish dinners to build his image. The ultimate family man had instantly become public enemy number one. People dug up every old photo, every fake sweet status he ever posted to dissect and crucify him. The people who used to admire him, who wished they had a thoughtful husband like him, now felt deceived and betrayed. They called him a coward, a hypocrite, a monster in disguise. The public's outrage acted like a tsunami, washing away the glamorous shell he had spent years painting. But sitting in the eye of the storm, I fully realized that a storm destroys more than just the person who started it. It ravages the victim too. Alongside words of encouragement and sympathy, I started seeing malicious, razor-sharp comments stabbing at my heart. How can anyone be that stupid? Beaten for 5 years and didn't know how to leave. She must have done something wrong for her husband to hit her. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Ah, playing the depression card for clicks. You can't trust anyone these days. Those apathetic words danced before my eyes, making my chest tighten, a wave of resentment choking my throat. Clara was furious and about to type a savage reply, but I gently placed my hand on hers and shook my head. Leave it, Clara. We can't control what the public says. They don't live my life. They have no idea what it's like to be threatened and completely isolated. I put the phone down, looking at the gray Chicago sky through the window. I accepted those bitter words like a tough pill to swallow. They were partially right. I was wrong. Wrong because I was too submissive. Wrong because my silence enabled evil to reign in my own home. I had blindly believed in maintaining a perfect home only to nearly pay for it with my life. The social media storm was cruel, but it completely woke me up. I realized that the foolish vanity I tried so hard to protect was utterly worthless. When the velvet curtain was ripped down, the only thing left was the naked, agonizing truth. Strangers on the internet could curse or pity me today, and tomorrow they would forget it instantly to chase the next drama. I was the only one who had to directly face and clean up the ashes of my own life. Sterling, sitting in county jail, certainly had no idea that his virtual admirers were now turning their backs and cursing him to hell. The reputation he valued more than the lives of his wife and child was now being trampled into the mud. That was the price he had to pay for living a fake superficial life. 2 weeks later, the doctors allowed me to transfer from the ICU to a regular room. My health had shown positive signs. However, the lingering effects of the beating and the critical trauma still haunted me stubbornly. Just walking had become sheer torture for me. Every time my feet touched the floor, the pain from the old fractures in my ribs and ankle flared up, shooting straight to my brain and making me break out in a cold sweat. Julian was always there, patiently supporting me as I took shaky steps down the hospital corridor. He didn't say much, just offering his solid arm as my anchor. Sometimes it hurt so much I wanted to give up, to collapse on the floor and cry out all my frustration. But looking into Julian's steady eyes, looking at Clara's dedication and the rest of my colleagues, I gritted my teeth and stood back up. I had to get better. I needed enough strength to stand in court, look my enemy dead in the eye, and demand justice. I contacted the most high-profile law firm in the city, retaining them for my legal representation. The day attorney Harrison Cole arrived at the hospital, I had gathered all the case files and evidence I possessed, from the old phone, the living will video, to the loan shark debt papers the CPD had provided. I sat in my wheelchair, my face still pale, but my eyes no longer held the fearful, evasive look from before. Mr. Cole, I want to press charges against Sterling Vance for aggravated domestic battery and attempted murder. I want him to face the absolute maximum penalty under the law. No leniency whatsoever, I said, my voice clear and definitive. Attorney Cole flipped through the pages of the file. He nodded repeatedly, his face showing deep respect and commitment. Rest assured, Dr. Advance. With this ironclad evidence, combined with the aggravating factors of his despicable motive and ruthless methods, we are guaranteed to win. I will do everything in my power to protect your rights. Holding the legal representation agreement in my hands, I felt like I was being injected with an invisible source of power. I was no longer the submissive, resigned wife standing behind her husband. Now I was the plaintiff, the one initiating the attack on the fortress of crime Sterling had built. I spent my free time reading law books and researching trial procedures. I wanted to be more than just a victim seeking justice. I wanted to be an informed woman who held her destiny in her own hands. During the nights in my hospital room, I no longer cried in secret. I began planning for a new life. After being discharged, I envisioned a small house, just the two of us. I pictured peaceful dinners without the sounds of screaming or shattering glass. That thought acted like a lighthouse, illuminating my mind, helping me survive the physical agony tormenting me every night. One afternoon, during a torrential downpour, Sterling's private defense attorney came to the hospital to see me. The man was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, his face radiating the cunning, slick vibe of a professional fixer. He placed an expensive imported fruit basket on the table and flashed a highly manufactured corporate smile. "Hello, Dr. Vance. I represent my client Sterling, visiting to check on your health. Sterling is incredibly remorseful in jail. He worries about you day and night and prays for your speedy recovery." I scoffed, a cold smirk on my face, not even glancing at the fruit basket once. "You didn't come all this way just to deliver that empty fake greeting. Did you get straight to the point?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, lowering his voice in a faux intimate tone. "Harper, husbands and wives share a bed. Even dishes crash into each other sometimes, let alone people. Sterling knows he was wrong and he wants to negotiate. If you agree to sign a non-prosecution affidavit and request leniency for him, he will immediately sign an uncontested divorce agreement and grant you full custody of your child. Furthermore, he promises to transfer a rural property deed to you as compensation for emotional distress." I looked at the man in front of me, disgusted by the way they haggled over someone's trauma and dignity. Sterling was still the exact same. He still thought everything in this world could be solved with money and a compromise. He thought I was still the stupid woman desperate for the title of a complete family or greedy enough to want some random piece of land. He was using custody, the most precious thing to me, as a hostage to threaten me, forcing me to let him off the hook. "You go back and tell your client," I said slowly, every word as sharp as a scalpel, "that I don't need his charity. As for custody, the family court will rule based on morality and financial stability. And what right does a broke, indebted attempted murderer have to fight me for custody?" I grabbed the settlement agreement the lawyer had just slid toward me and ripped it to shreds right in front of him. The sound of tearing paper echoed dryly in the quiet room. The exact sound of me shredding the absolute last shred of marital loyalty I had left. His dirty money is something I don't need. As for his freedom, let the law decide. I would rather my daughter have a father in prison for his crimes than live with a hypocritical father roaming free above the law. "Please leave. We will see each other in court." The lawyer was stunned. He never expected the thin, frail woman on the hospital bed to have such a hardened, ruthless attitude. He quietly packed his briefcase, gave a stiff nod, and rushed out, leaving behind only my utter contempt. After the intense battle with Sterling's lawyer, I had to face a challenge infinitely more difficult, facing my own little girl. My mother brought Piper to the hospital to visit me. The moment she saw her mother lying in a hospital bed hooked up to a tangle of tubes, the little girl burst into tears and threw herself at me, hugging me tight. Her tiny soft hands traced the dark bruises on my arms, her big round eyes brimming with tears, filled with fear and sorrow. "Mommy, does it hurt a lot? Why are you sick for so long? Where's Daddy?" "Mommy," Grandma said, "Daddy went on a business trip. When is he coming back to us?" Her innocent questions rubbed salt into my bleeding heart. I hugged her tight, inhaling the sweet scent of baby shampoo in her fine hair, trying desperately not to break down, crying. I had asked myself 1,000 times whether I should lie to her to preserve the image of her father. Would this brutal truth stain her pure young soul? But then I remembered the nights she flinched in terror hearing her father yell. I remembered the fearful look in her eyes whenever she saw him drunk. She was young but incredibly perceptive. She had vaguely sensed the instability in our home for a long time. If I continued to lie, I would just be pushing her right back into the vicious cycle of hypocrisy that I had just barely escaped from. I gently pulled her back, looking straight into her eyes, and softly wiped the tears from her chubby cheeks. Piper, listen to Mommy. Daddy didn't go on a business trip. Daddy did a very bad thing. Daddy hurt Mommy very, very badly. And when adults do bad things, they have to be punished. They have to go away to a place where they learn to be better people. She looked at me confused, her lips pressed tightly together. Did Daddy hit you? I saw him yell at you a lot. I hate when Daddy hurts you. Her words made me shatter entirely. It turned out she knew. She had always been watching and remembering all the pain I tried so hard to hide. I mistakenly thought I was protecting her, but in reality, I was making her endure the trauma in silence right alongside me. That's right, baby girl. Daddy hit Mommy, and that is a very, very bad thing to do. We are not going to live with Daddy anymore. It's just going to be you and me. Is that okay with you? Piper nodded furiously. She buried her head in my chest, her voice tiny but resolute. It's okay. I just need you, Mommy. I'll be good. I'll protect you. I won't let anyone hit you ever again. I hugged my child, tears of happiness and sorrow weaving together. My daughter's heartbreaking maturity was my biggest motivation to never ever allow myself to collapse. I realized that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. I had demolished the wall of silence between mother and daughter. And from now on, we would rebuild our lives on a foundation of truth and love. During my days in the hospital, waiting for the preliminary hearing, I no longer felt lonely inside those cold, stark white walls. My story was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that awakened the conscience of the people around me. They were the silent witnesses, people who had previously chosen to stay quiet about my suffering because they were afraid of getting involved, driven by the ingrained mindset of minding their own business, but now they bravely stepped into the light to stand by my side. The first person to seek me out was Dr. Meredith, a colleague from my department who rarely spoke to me beyond pleasantries. She walked into the room holding a fruit basket, her eyes red and her face full of guilt. She grabbed my frail hand, her voice choking up. Harper, I'm so sorry. I was so oblivious. A few times when I saw you wearing sunglasses to work, or saw you secretly popping Hydroxyzine painkillers in the lounge, I suspected something, but I just brushed it off. I thought marital spats were normal. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed you were enduring a living hell? Dr. Meredith's delayed apology made my nose sting. I didn't blame her. Nor did I blame anyone else. In this fast-paced society, people are busy worrying about their own bills, busy worrying about their own small pockets of happiness. Very few have the courage to stick their noses into someone else's family drama, especially when the abuser wears a glamorous disguise like Sterling did. I gave a weak smile, shaking my head to reassure her. Please don't blame yourself. It's because I hid it too well. It's because I was too weak. It wasn't just my colleagues. The lead detective informed me of news that was both surprising and deeply moving. The neighbors at the luxury Gold Coast condo where I used to live, the people who usually just gave a cold, polite nod in the elevator, had collectively spoken up. The old doorman, who had seen me running down to the lobby in the middle of the night with swollen eyes on multiple occasions, voluntarily went to the precinct to give a statement. He talked about the time Sterling was drunk and screaming down the hallway, about the loud crashes that sounded like furniture being thrown coming from my unit late at night. Most importantly, Chloe, the neighbor living in the unit right next to ours, had sent the police a video extracted from her hallway Ring camera. It showed Sterling grabbing me by the hair and dragging me out of the elevator and into our apartment on a stormy night 2 months ago. Chloe relayed a message to me through my lawyer. I regret it so much, Harper. That night when I heard you scream, I was going to step in, but my husband stopped me saying it was domestic business and we shouldn't get involved. If only I had been more decisive, knocked on the door, or called security, maybe you wouldn't have had to endure the beatings that followed. Their remorse, although late, provided critical pieces of the puzzle that completed the full picture of Sterling's crimes. Those testimonies proved his violent behavior wasn't a one-time outburst, but a systematic ongoing pattern executed openly regardless of who was watching. I lay in the hospital bed reading the deposition transcripts, my heart tightening. It turned out I was never completely abandoned. Kindness and compassion still exist in everyone. It's just that sometimes they are buried under fear and apathy. When people finally dare to break down the wall of silence, justice has a chance to be served. Those silent witnesses, they weren't just helping me, they were saving their own consciences. I silently thanked them because in the end, they chose to stand in the light, chose to protect a vulnerable woman rather than continuing to compromise with the evil running rampant right next door. 3 months later, when the physical wounds on my skin had scarred over, but the pain in my soul was still bleeding, that fateful day finally arrived. The criminal trial for Sterling Vance on charges of aggravated battery and attempted first-degree murder with the aggravating factor of a heinous motive was open to the public. The sky that day was gloomy, dark clouds swirling over the city skyline like they wanted to pour down rain to wash away the filth of humanity. I refused the stretcher, insisting that Julian and Clara help me into a wheelchair. I wanted to sit with my back straight, wanted to hold my head high to face the man who had trampled on my life. The wheelchair rolled through the imposing gates of the courthouse. The sound of the wheels grinding against the pavement sounded dry and gritty. A massive crowd of reporters and curious onlookers had gathered in the courtyard early in the morning. Camera flashes went off non-stop. Lenses were pointed directly at me like the black barrels of guns. I didn't dodge them, nor did I bow my head in shame. I wore sunglasses to hide my eyes, which were still bruised. My thin hands gripped the armrests of the wheelchair to draw courage. When I was wheeled into the courtroom, the chaotic noise instantly died down. Every eye turned toward the small, frail woman wearing oversized hospital clothes. And then on the opposite side, the door for the defendant opened. 2 sheriff's deputies escorted Sterling inside. My heart skipped a beat, my hands unconsciously gripping so hard my nails dug into my skin. Was this really Sterling? The polished, handsome man who always had his hair slicked back with gel and smelled of expensive cologne. Now he looked absolutely pathetic. His head had been shaved close, exposing a gaunt, sickly pale face. He was wearing an Orange County jail jumpsuit, his shoulders, once so arrogant, now slumped and lifeless like a withered leaf. He walked with his head down, refusing to look side to side, dragging his feet heavily toward the defense table. Sitting in the gallery, I saw Eleanor, his mother, staring at me with eyes shooting fire. If looks could kill, I probably would have died 1,000 times under that hateful glare. She let out a tragic, "My boy," and began to sob hysterically, but was quickly ordered to be quiet by the judge. The presiding judge struck his gavel, the sharp crack echoing through the massive courtroom, signaling that the hour of judgment had arrived. I took a deep breath, trying to regulate my heart, which was pounding erratically in my chest. This is not the time to be weak, Harper. This wheelchair isn't a symbol of disability. It is a throne of survival. I am sitting here in this court of law to collect on the debt of blood and tears from the past 5 years. Standing before the judge, Sterling mumbled his answers to the preliminary identification questions. His voice was shaky and hoarse, a far cry from the aggressive roaring when he beat me or forced me to sign away my house. It turns out that when stripped of his successful businessman label when facing the wrath of the law, he was nothing more than a pathetic, cowardly weakling. I looked at him and felt no fear, nor did I feel any lingering affection. All I felt was a rising, suffocating wave of disgust. The trial heated up as it entered the opening statements. Sterling's defense attorney was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a trademark half-smile full of calculation. He was infamous in legal circles as a fixer who could turn black into white. Willing to use any dirty trick to get his clients off, he stood up, adjusted his tie smoothly, and began his defense with a booming but venomous tone. "Your Honor," he stated clearly, his eyes glancing mockingly in my direction. "My client, Mr. Sterling Vance, admits there was a physical altercation with his wife. However, we must closely examine the root causes that led to this unfortunate event. Where there is smoke, there is fire. A gentleman who loves his family as much as Mr. Vance. Why would he lose control to such an extent?" I sat frozen in my wheelchair, feeling my blood boiling. What was he doing? Was he about to blame the victim? Based on my investigation, the lawyer continued, his voice dropping to sound sympathetic. "Dr. Vance is a workaholic who frequently neglected her family and child. She treated the hospital as her home, placing her patients above her own husband and daughter. Mr. Vance tried to talk to her multiple times, but she refused to change, causing marital resentment to build over time. Furthermore, postpartum, Dr. Vance showed severe signs of depression and psychological instability, constantly snapping and provoking her husband. Those blatant fabricated lies felt like poison daggers plunging straight into my heart. I gripped the wheelchair tightly. My knuckles were white with pure rage. So, this was their strategy. Smear my character. Paint me as a terrible wife and an irresponsible mother to justify Sterling's violence. They wanted to turn a murderer into the victim of an unhappy marriage. On the night of the incident, the lawyer raised his voice. Dr. Vance was the one who raised her voice first, insulted Mr. Vance's dignity, and even threatened divorce and taking their child away. This provoked Mr. Vance in a moment of extreme uncontrollable passion, causing him to accidentally push her. The injury to Dr. Vance's head was an unfortunate accident from a fall. Mr. Vance had absolutely no intent to kill. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Some shook their heads in dismay. Others looked at me with suspicion. The lawyer's cunning rhetoric was starting to infect the minds of the jury and gallery. I felt my chest tighten, tears of pure outrage threatening to spill over. I was beaten half to death, stripped of my right to live, and yet here in a court of law, they dragged my name through the mud. They accused me of being the cause of my own suffering. Sterling stood at the defense table, his head bowed as if in remorse. But I swear I saw the corner of his mouth twitch up into a smug smirk. He actually believed money could buy justice, that he could hire spineless tongues to cover up his crimes. The feeling of being verbally abused right in front of a crowd was even more painful than physical lashes. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream that they were lying, but my body wouldn't let me. I could only bite my lip until it bled, swallowing the bitter pill, waiting for the moment the truth could speak for itself. Just as Sterling's lawyer finished speaking with a triumphant look, thinking he had successfully planted doubt in the court's mind, Attorney Harrison Cole, my representative, slowly stood up. He didn't rush to verbally rebut those deceitful arguments. Instead, he requested the court's permission to display the most critical piece of evidence. A tiny USB drive was plugged into the courtroom's AV system, projecting onto the massive screen and blasting through the high-powered speakers. The room went dead silent. All eyes were locked on the large screen. The audio file opened. The initial static vanished, replaced by the deafening, vulgar sounds echoing from the past, ripping through the fake, solemn atmosphere the defense had just constructed. You won't sign it? Fine. If you die, the house goes to me anyway. I just need to beat you half to death and then refuse your medical care. I don't have to waste money feeding you, and I get the full life insurance payout. Sterling's voice rang out crystal clear, icy, and terrifyingly cruel. That was not the voice of a husband in a moment of passion, or a man who accidentally pushed his wife, as the defense claimed. That was the voice of a monster who meticulously planned to murder his wife out of bottomless greed. Every single word was a devastating slap to the defense attorney's face, wiping the smile completely off his lips, replacing it with sheer panic. The entire gallery gasped in horror. The attendees, even those who were doubting me, just moments ago, were now sitting in stunned silence. They couldn't believe their ears. The naked truth was more brutal than any movie script. Following the audio, the photos of my injuries were displayed one by one. My back covered in a grid of whip marks, my swollen face, my severely bruised legs. That silent evidence held more destructive power than tens of thousands of eloquent defense arguments. Sterling, standing at the defense table, had legs shaking so badly he collapsed into his chair. He didn't dare look up at the screen, burying his head in his hands as if trying to escape reality. He knew it was over. Every act, every cover-up had collapsed entirely under the blinding light of the truth. Eleanor sat in the gallery, her face completely drained of blood. Her mouth hung open, unable to utter a single word. Her initial aggression this wasn't just damning evidence. It was a slow-motion reel of my stolen, trampled youth. But this time, I wasn't crying out of pain or humiliation. I was crying because the truth was finally out in the open. That evidence spoke for all the suppressed resentment I had held inside for years. Attorney Cole turned to the judge and jury, his voice warm but fierce. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a domestic dispute. This is a calculated, premeditated plot for murder. Driven by a heinous financial motive, the defendant not only physically abused the victim, but psychologically tortured her over a prolonged period. The defense's excuses about a crime of passion are completely baseless in the face of this ironclad evidence. The truth was laid bare, killing the previous murmurs of gossip. Every eye from the curious public to the solemn judge shifted entirely to me, the small woman sitting in a wheelchair in the middle of a courtroom. The presiding judge adjusted his glasses, his deep authoritative voice echoing through the massive room, shattering the suffocating silence. The court recognizes the victim. Dr. Harper Vance, do you have a victim impact statement before the court enters deliberation? I took a deep breath, feeling my chest still twinge with a dull ache. But the fear and weakness I usually carried had vanished entirely. Julian and Clara, sitting right behind me, gently placed their hands on my shoulders, lending me their strength, a solid anchor that gave me the courage to speak. I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair, forcing myself to sit as straight as humanly possible. I wanted to look directly into the eyes of everyone present, and most importantly into the eyes of the man shaking at the defense table. I began to speak. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and articulate. Every word pulled from the very bottom of my bleeding heart. Your Honor, members of the jury, I am a medical doctor. These hands of mine have held scalpels, saving thousands of patients, snatching them right out of the Grim Reaper's grasp. But the brutal irony is that I couldn't save myself. I couldn't heal the wounds inflicted by my own husband over the past 5 years. I paused for a second to suppress the overwhelming emotion rising in my throat. My eyes sweeping over Sterling's bowed head. He didn't dare look at me, his shoulders were trembling violently. Perhaps now he finally felt the true price he had to pay for his cruelty. I continued, my voice growing stronger, harder like steel. Today I sit here exposing the ugly scars on my body and in my soul, not to beg for anyone's pity. I simply want to declare one thing. Domestic violence is not just a family matter. It is not just a husband disciplining his wife. The entire courtroom was dead silent. I could hear the muffled sobs of several women sitting in the front rows. I looked directly into the camera lenses of the reporters as if trying to send this message to the thousands of other women suffering just like me. It is a crime. No one, whether a husband or a father, has the right to use the name of love or family to trample on someone else's dignity and life. Silence is not a sacrifice. It is complicity with evil. I almost paid with my life to realize that, and I hope no one else ever has to walk down this agonizing, tragic path I walked. Finishing my statement, I felt like the massive boulder that had been crushing my chest for years was finally gone. I turned to look at Sterling one last time. My eyes were strangely calm. There was no hatred left, no lingering attachment. There was only pity for a human being who threw everything away due to his own greed and selfishness. The deliberation period dragged on slowly, like bitter coffee dripping to the bottom of a cup. Sterling sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his head in his hands, exuding the utter despair of a man who already knew his tragic end. Eleanor sat in the gallery, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying, occasionally whimpering her son's name in desperation. She looked at me with eyes that were both resentful and pleading, but I responded only with cold silence because misplaced forgiveness is simply cruelty to oneself. Finally, the buzzer signaled the judge's return. Everyone in the room stood up. The judge, with a stern face, held the carefully deliberated verdict, and began to read in a commanding voice that echoed across the vast space. Every word of the verdict struck like the gavel of justice, exposing the crimes and sealing the fate of the perpetrator. Based on the evidence, documents in the case file and the arguments presented in court, the judge stated loudly, "The court finds the actions of the defendant, Sterling Vance, to be exceptionally severe, directly violating the life and physical well-being of the victim, which is protected by the defendant committed this crime with deliberate intent and a heinous motive to steal assets, demonstrating a total disregard for the law and a complete moral decay." My heart hammered rapidly, my hands gripping the wheelchair tightly as I waited for the final sentence. For these reasons, the court finds the defendant, Sterling Vance, guilty of aggravated domestic battery and attempted first-degree murder. Combining the sentences for both charges, the defendant, Sterling Vance, is sentenced to 18 years in state prison. Additionally, the defendant is ordered to pay full restitution for all medical bills and emotional distress suffered by the victim in accordance with the law. 18 years. That number struck like a bolt of lightning for Sterling and his family. Sterling staggered, his knees buckling. It took 2 deputies catching him to stop him from collapsing entirely right there. All the blood drained from his face. His eyes stared vacantly into space as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. His life, his career, the status he was so proud of, everything ended right here. Behind the wooden railing, Eleanor let out a blood-curdling scream, and then fainted dead away into the arms of a relative. The gallery erupted in whispers, the wailing of the defendant's family mixing with the relieved sighs of those rooting for justice. I sat silently. A single hot tear rolled down my cheek. But this time, it wasn't a tear of pain or fear. It was a tear of liberation. A tear proving my belief that justice, no matter how delayed, is always real. The judge's gavel slammed down on the bench. Bang! With one definitive sound, he closed the trial, closing a dark, tragic chapter of my life forever. The luxurious modern Gold Coast condo. My husband and I lived in the place that held the fake, glamorous memories, and the long tears-soaked nights was officially foreclosed by the bank to cover the massive loans Sterling left behind. On the day I moved out, I didn't take much. Just a few sets of clothes for my daughter and me and the keepsakes that truly belonged to me. Looking at the expensive designer furniture and the fine art covered in bank foreclosure notices, I felt no regret. Instead, I felt incredibly relieved, like I had just escaped a suffocating, gilded cage. My life savings were almost entirely wiped out by my husband and his debts. I walked out into the street empty-handed. But inside, I felt wealthier than ever before. I was wealthy because I still had my life. I still had my daughter by my side. And most importantly, I had my freedom. I took Piper back to my parents' old house in Oak Park, the place I had left empty for years. The historic, modest home had peeling paint showing the wear of time. The iron gate creaked whenever it opened. But to me right now, it was the warmest and safest castle in the world. After 2 months of resting to recover my health and stabilize my life, I decided to return to Pierce Memorial Hospital. On my first day back, I stood in front of the mirror for a very long time, adjusting my freshly ironed white lab coat and clipping my ID badge over my left breast. A mix of familiarity and nervousness fluttered in my heart. I took a deep breath, reassuring myself that everything was going to be fine. I was terrified of the pitying looks, terrified of the whispers behind my back about the doctor whose husband went to prison. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. Walking into the hospital lobby, the familiar smell of antiseptics hit me. But this time, it didn't carry the metallic stench of death like it did in my horrifying memories. It was the smell of life, of the dedication I had committed my entire youth to. I kept my head down and walked fast, trying to avoid the curious stares of the people around me, my heart pounding in my chest. But entirely contrary to my fears, when I walked into the neurosurgery department, I saw Julian, Clara, and all my colleagues waiting there for me. In their hands were beautiful bouquets of flowers, and on their lips were the brightest, most genuine smiles. "Welcome home, Harper," Clara cheered, running over to give me a massive hug. Her eyes were tearing up. "You lost so much weight, but seeing you look this radiant puts our minds at ease." Julian stepped forward, handing me a bright bouquet of sunflowers. His eyes shone with respect and warmth. "Welcome back, Dr. Vance. The patients have been missing you, Chief." I hugged the bouquet to my chest. The gentle scent of the flowers made my nose sting. I looked at the familiar faces around me, the people who had stood by my side during my darkest days. A massive wave of emotion overwhelmed me. It turns out I worried for nothing. When you bravely face the darkness and step into the light, people don't look at you with cheap pity. They look at you with respect and admiration. My first day back went by in a blur of busyness, but I was full of energy. I threw myself into surgeries and consultations. My hands holding the scalpel were as steady and precise as if I had never been through a trauma. When I stood in the OR under the shadowless surgical lights, I forgot all the sorrow and past trauma. I was simply a doctor pouring everything I had into snatching a patient's life back from death. I sat down with Julian and the hospital administration to establish a special task force right in our department, naming it Project Tomorrow. This wasn't some grandiose charity fund or a series of empty seminars. It was a legal and psychological first aid station. I wanted this place to be a life preserver for women drowning in the floodwaters of abuse, helping them identify domestic violence, gather evidence, and most importantly, regain faith in themselves. I brought attorney Harrison Cole and several psychologists on board. We operated quietly but persistently after our shifts. The day the project launched, the very first person to seek me out was a young woman in her early 20s. Her arm was bandaged from being accidentally pushed by her husband. She sat curled up in a chair, tears welling in her eyes, trembling as she asked me, "Doctor, I'm so scared. If I call the cops, he's going to kill me. I don't have anywhere else to go." I grabbed the young girl's freezing hands, looking deep into those panicked eyes, and said softly, "Look at me. I used to be just as terrified as you. I used to think I had no way out. It took me 5 years to learn how to protect myself. But you don't have to wait that long. Silence is not the way to save a home. It's the fastest way to destroy yourself. You have me here. You have the law. You are not alone. The girl broke down crying. But this time, they were tears of relief. I guided her on how to securely store photos of her injuries, how to record threats, and connected her with a lawyer to safely initiate divorce proceedings. Watching her walk out of that room with a steadier posture, my heart felt warm. I realized my calling wasn't just holding a scalpel to save lives on an operating table. It was also using the scars of my own life as a shield to protect other vulnerable women. Project Tomorrow was new and full of challenges, but every time I helped someone escape the claws of violence, I felt my life gain more meaning. I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to be a big sister, a friend offering a hand when they needed it, letting them know that after a long dark night, tomorrow the sun will rise again. Julian was always there. He stayed by my side like a tree, quietly offering shade, never loud, never overbearing. He understood exactly how deep my wounds went. So, he never put any romantic pressure on me. He didn't offer empty sweet words or promise me the moon and stars. He just quietly cared for me through the smallest actions. On afternoons when my shift ran long, he would quietly pick Piper up from school, take her to get ice cream, or buy her a new comic book. Once I walked out of the O at midnight, absolutely exhausted, only to find Julian still sitting in the waiting area, holding a container of warm soup. He looked at me with a kind smile. "Eat a little to get your strength back. Piper is asleep at her grandma's. Don't worry." His gentle care sometimes made my hardened heart skip a strange beat. I wasn't made of stone. I realized his feelings for me, but the trauma of my past marriage made me like a bird, terrified of a bent branch. I hesitated, afraid to take a step forward. I was afraid of making another mistake, afraid I wasn't strong enough to love and trust again. I was terrified of hurting this good man with the sharp, broken shards of my soul. One weekend evening, Julian took Piper and me for a walk in the park, watching his tall figure walking ahead, holding Piper's hand as her crisp laughter carried in the wind. My nose suddenly stung. How long had it been since my daughter experienced such pure, untainted joy? How long had it been since I felt this simple peace? Julian turned back to look at me under the amber glow of the streetlights. His eyes were incredibly warm and forgiving. He slowed down to walk beside me. His deep voice broke the silence. "Harper, I know you need time. I'm in no rush. I can wait a year, 2 years, or even longer. I just hope you don't lock your heart away completely. Let me share the burden with you, even if it's just as a friend, a colleague." I looked down at my scuffed canvas sneakers and replied softly, "Thank you, Julian. Thank you for not abandoning us during the hardest times, but I'm just not ready yet. I'm afraid I'll drag you down." Julian didn't say anything. He just gave my trembling hand a light squeeze. It was a grip just firm enough to make me feel safe, but loose enough that I could pull away if I wanted to. That absolute respect from him was the best medicine for my scarred heart. One morning, I got a phone call from an old neighbor. They informed me that Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had suffered a severe stroke. She was currently in the ER at a rural hospital. Morley absolutely no family around to care for her. Since the day Sterling went to prison, all their relatives had vanished, leaving her to live entirely alone in a large freezing house. Hearing the news, I didn't feel a surge of triumph or hatred, just a vast sadness about the fleeting nature of human life. In the end, she was just a blindly devoted mother who lived her whole life for her son, but taught him the wrong way to live, ultimately reaping the karma of dying alone. I took a half day off and drove to the rural hospital, not as a beautiful daughter-in-law paying her respects, but as a doctor, and also to face the past one final time so I could truly cut away the last lingering threads of torment. Walking into the hospital room that rire of medicine, I saw Eleanor curled up on the bed. Her mouth was slack and half of her body was paralyzed. The venomous woman who had loudly cursed me out in the middle of a hospital back then was now just a frail, decaying and pitiful old woman. Seeing me walk in, her eyes flashed with shock, which quickly morphed into shame and fear. She tried to mumble, wanting to say something, tears streaming down her wrinkled face, but no words came out. I stepped closer, calmly reviewed her medical chart, and adjusted her IV line. My movements were practiced and professional, but completely detached. "You should just rest," I said, my voice soft, but entirely devoid of affection. "I've already paid the hospital deposit for you. I also hired a nursing assistant to take care of you for the next few days. As for me, this is the last time I will ever be here." Eleanor stared at me. Her one working hand reached out, trembling, trying to grab my hand as if begging for forgiveness or perhaps attempting a delayed reconciliation. But I took a step back, maintaining a safe distance. I didn't hate her anymore, but I couldn't pretend the trauma never happened. The greatest forgiveness I could offer her was refusing to carry hatred in my heart. But that didn't mean I had to keep bearing responsibility for the person who enabled the destruction of my life. Take care of yourself. Let the past sleep. Piper and I have our own lives now. I hope you find peace. I turned my back and walked away, not looking over my shoulder at the late, regretful tears rolling down her cheeks. Stepping out of the hospital doors, the sky today was a deep, towering blue. The autumn breeze blew softly, rustling my coat. I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling my chest incredibly light. 1 year later, the cheerful chime of a windbell echoed as I pushed open the door to my favorite cafe, tucked away in a quiet alley. The rich aroma of roasted coffee mixed with the scent of fresh pastries, creating a wonderfully cozy and comforting atmosphere. I picked a corner table right by the window where I could watch the rushing crowds outside while staying completely isolated from the city's noise. Today was Sunday, a beautiful day for me to carve out some quiet time for myself, reflecting on the long road I had traveled. Outside the glass window, under the red leaves of an oak tree, Julian and Piper were playing with a small dog. My daughter's crisp laughter rang out clear as a babbling brook. Julian patiently bent down to wipe the sweat off her forehead. The way he looked at her was overflowing with love, no different from a real father. The image was as beautiful as a painting, simple yet vibrant, warming my heart more than any fire ever could. We still hadn't had a wedding, nor had we rushed to bind ourselves with a marriage certificate. Julian and I chose to walk side by side, sharing the joys and sorrows of life as naturally as possible, allowing love to grow from understanding rather than obligation. I took a sip of hot black coffee. The bitterness on the tip of my tongue quickly faded, leaving a sweet, lingering aftertaste in my throat. Life is just like this cup of coffee. You have to taste all the bitter, agonizing moments to fully appreciate the value of sweetness. Peace. I looked at my reflection in the window pane. The woman in the glass had just turned 40. The corners of her eyes showed the faint crow's feet of time and hardship, but her eyes were bright, peaceful, and totally free. She was no longer the submissive wife bowing her head to take a beating, nor the vengeance-filled woman in the courtroom from years ago. The current me knew how to love herself, knew how to cherish what she had, and knew how to let go of what didn't belong to her. I didn't become a famous bakery owner or a high-profile social activist. I am still Dr. Vance, putting on my white lab coat every day, but with a completely different mindset. I heal the sick, save lives, and I also heal myself every single day. Sterling is still serving time in state prison, paying the price for his sins. I no longer care how he is living or if he feels any remorse. He belongs to the past, a painful but necessary past for me to grow. As for me, I am living fully in the present and looking toward the future. Julian looked up toward the cafe and caught my eyes watching them. He smiled and waved. Piper also excitedly ran over, pressing her face against the glass to make a goofy face at her mom. I burst out laughing, the lightest and happiest laugh I've had in years. The bright golden sunlight pierced through the leaves, dancing on the shoulders of my coat. I whispered to myself, "Finally, I am living. Truly living a life worth